Warwickshire County Record Office has only one medieval illuminated charter. Illuminated refers to the decorative border that you see. It is kept in a bespoke case, glass-fronted, but covered by a fitted box lid to keep out the light. We call it the Beauchamp Charter, as it was Thomas Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, who caused the charter to be made. But it doesn't belong to the Warwick Castle collection, to which other Beauchamp records do. We know the charter was kept with the Warwick Borough muniments, as the 17th century Warwickshire antiquary and author William Dugdale refers to it in the Borough muniments in his first edition of Warwickshire, published in 1656. But in 1730, reference is made to its being with the parish records, presumably St Mary's, Warwick. Thereafter, it came into the possession of the Landor family of Rugeley and Warwick. During the 20th century, the document was put up for auction. It was purchased and intended for an American collection. However, fortunately, it shortly came into the possession of Warwickshire County Record Office. The writing is beautifully set down, although incomprehensible to most of us, as the language used is Latin, and some of the letter shapes are unfamiliar to the modern reader. And so while, when it comes out on show, it is admired as an object of beauty and skilled craftsmanship, people can't really take time to read it. And then, when I tell visitors that it concerns taxation, a little of the allure is lost and people move on. But I believe that the historical context can often lift interest levels of documents that are seemingly bureaucratic and mundane in content. I would like to convince you that this is a case in point, and sometimes we can relate to a document in ways unthought of before we delve into its history, depending on our own circumstances. This is surprisingly true with the Beauchamp Charter. It resonates with us in this crucial time in a way I hadn't thought of until I revisited its background. So what does the document actually tell us? It relates that Thomas Beauchamp informs all the faithful in Christ that whereas he and his ancestors have been accustomed to receive tolls from the agents of merchants and others coming with their goods to trade in the town of Warwick, now understanding that they no longer frequent the market and instead take their goods elsewhere, to the detriment of the townspeople, and desiring the general good, and for the praise of God and the salvation of his soul, and especially on the entreaty of Catherine his wife, he now grants that foreign merchants coming to the town to buy, sell, or merely pass through shall be forever free of tolls, stallage, a rent from a market stall, or market rents. It is dated at Warwick Castle on the 1st of January 1359. So, in order to entice traders back to Warwick for the prosperity of the town, the townsfolk, and no doubt himself, Thomas waives his fees. Grants such as these and other rights survive throughout archives, but it is commonplace for them to be on smaller strips of parchment, with sometimes cramped writing, written entirely end to end, and often undecorated save for the flourish of the odd letter, authenticated by a seal. If we take a look at this document then, the parchment membrane is large, the writing is clear and well spaced, and it is bordered and decorated with gold leaf, lapis lazuli and other inks. It is authenticated by the Earl's seal, attached by coloured braid to the parchment. This is a showpiece, perhaps promoting the Earl's magnanimity to his people. It's also about status, wealth and power. Parchment, ink, and in particular the gold leaf and lapis lazuli were expensive commodities, so this is important. But why? Thomas Beauchamp was a leading magnate of the realm, perhaps the most military of all the Earls of Warwick. During his military career, he spent time fighting against the Scots and commanding armies in France during the 100 Years' War. Indeed, he commanded a force at the Battle of Crécy. If we look at the seal, we see it displays Thomas in all his military finery, although the iconography is typical of the period for higher status nobles. That said, it does truly represent this particular earl. The seal authenticates the document and authorises the actions contained within, but was he actually the instigator of the grant, or was Thomas ratifying the proposal of another? In his favour, we know the town of Warwick was most useful to the earl's own economic prosperity, and so he may have recognised the need to take action to halt a decline. And there had been a hiatus in the fighting of the French around this time, which perhaps allowed Thomas to turn his attentions from the battlefield. Whereafter he commissioned his scribes to draw up the document, or maybe it was the work of scribes at St Mary's Collegiate Church, an establishment firmly connected to the Earls of Warwick. However, we are informed by the charter itself that Thomas had taken notice upon the supplication of Catherine his wife. This is interesting, as the work behind the scenes may have been due to a woman, and might we therefore have evidence of a woman holding the fort at home? There is a third possibility. The town of Warwick was arguably the most baronial of boroughs, and wholly dependent upon its earls during the Middle Ages. It is possible to imagine worried burgesses petitioning Catherine to intervene with regard to the evident decline of the town's economy. It could also be they who were responsible for the physical creation of the charter, something that they could look upon that enshrined and made good the Earl's words. We will probably never know who was responsible for the impetus behind the grant or the physical creation of the charter. The charter, as we know, was created in 1359. Trade had dwindled, as written in the record, and, as said, had negatively impacted the prosperity of the town, its people, and probably the Earl himself. But what lay behind this economic downturn? I think we can probably attribute some, if not all of it, to an earlier nationwide catastrophe. I think this charter was born out of this event, and this is why this fantastic charter is not just a pretty picture. In 1348, the plague we know as the Black Death reached the south of England. It spread steadily through the land, affecting the whole country by the summer of 1349, and it intermittently returned over the centuries. One of the consequences arising from the devastating mortality rate brought about by the initial visitation was a shortage of labour, and despite attempts by government to restrict wage rises, labourers were still able to demand higher pay, and presumably traders were happy to take their produce to markets where no tolls, rents, etc. were exacted. This charter, seen through our newly opened eyes, seems to be the means by which the Earl and the town of Warwick were attempting to ignite some form of economic recovery. Catherine died in August 1369 and was followed 3 months later by Thomas, another victim of the recurring plague.